1. The calm before the storm. Barron Trump's quiet flight. It was a typical flight from New York to Los Angeles. The skies were clear, and the hum of the airplane's engines provided a sense of calm. Barron Trump, son of the former president, sat in his seat quietly, looking out of the window. His mind wandered, filled with thoughts of space and his future goals. While many passengers were chatting or focused on their phones, Barron preferred solitude, enjoying the peace that only air travel could offer. As a young man accustomed to the demands of a high-profile family, Barron found solace in these moments of tranquility. The flight was supposed to be just another routine journey, a chance to unwind and escape the bustling world around him. Yet as the plane soared higher, something unusual was brewing within the cabin. A flight attendant, known for her strict adherence to the rules, noticed Barron's relaxed posture. She had been trained to enforce the smallest details, and this time, it was Barron's seatbelt. He had yet to buckle up after the initial seatbelt sign had gone off. From her perspective, it was a minor issue, but Barron was about to feel the weight of her persistence. 2. The first intervention, a subtle reminder. As the plane cruised smoothly through the sky, the flight attendant made her way down the aisle, eyeing every passenger. Barron, still absorbed in his thoughts, hadn't noticed her approaching. She stopped near his seat, leaned in slightly, and with a forced smile said, "Sir, please fasten your seatbelt. The sign is off, but I just want to ensure your safety." Barron blinked, momentarily pulled from his daydream. He looked up, locking eyes with her. "I'm fine," he replied calmly, not understanding why the reminder felt so intrusive. His voice was calm, almost too composed for someone his age. But the attendant, sensing his indifference, stood there for a moment longer, expecting more of a reaction. Her gaze lingered on him, and Barron, feeling a sense of unease, tightened his grip on the armrest. His frustration began to simmer. This was supposed to be a peaceful flight, but now his personal space was being invaded, and it was starting to feel uncomfortable. The gentle reminder, which should have been a routine interaction, was beginning to feel like an unwanted intrusion. 3. The unwelcome pressure, a series of probing questions. A few moments passed, and Barron thought the situation would settle. However, the flight attendant returned shortly after, this time with more questions. She approached him, making sure he had his tray table up and his seat back in the upright position, as if she were supervising him as she would with any other passenger. "Is your phone off? Please make sure it's turned off during the flight," she insisted. Barron, irritated but trying to remain composed, nodded and muttered, "Yes, it's off." But the attendant wasn't satisfied. She stood there waiting for a more thorough response, staring at him like she expected something more than just compliance. Barron felt his patience begin to wear thin. It was one thing to be reminded of a seatbelt, but now her persistent checking of every little thing felt more like an interrogation. His youthful face, usually calm, was starting to show signs of irritation. Despite the unnecessary pressure, Barron tried to remain calm, taking deep breaths and resisting the urge to snap. But inside, the tension was building. 4. Crossing the line. Barron's growing frustration. As the flight continued, the constant attention from the flight attendant didn't cease. Every few minutes, she would stop by his seat to ask if he was comfortable, check if his seatbelt was securely fastened, or offer him another round of drinks. With each passing moment, Barron felt more and more like he was under a microscope. The situation had gone from a minor inconvenience to something much more stressful. He wasn't a child anymore. He was old enough to manage himself without constant oversight. Finally, Barron reached a breaking point. As the attendant once again hovered near his seat, her questioning becoming more relentless, he stood up abruptly, interrupting her. "I'm fine," he said sharply, his voice tinged with frustration. "I don't need constant reminders. I can take care of myself." His words echoed through the quiet cabin, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. The flight attendant, taken aback by Barron's sudden outburst, stood frozen for a moment. This wasn't how she usually dealt with passengers, especially one as young as Barron Trump. She hesitated before walking away, realizing that she had pushed too far. 5. The silent standoff. Tension in the cabin. After Barron's sharp response, the atmosphere on the plane shifted. The flight attendant retreated, but the tension remained thick in the air. Barron sat back down, his chest rising and falling as he tried to calm himself. His hands clenched tightly on the armrests, and his eyes stared ahead, avoiding eye contact with anyone around him. The passengers around Barron shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some exchanged nervous glances, while others continued to focus on their in-flight entertainment. No one dared to speak, but everyone felt the weight of the unspoken tension. The remainder of the flight passed in uneasy silence. Barron's thoughts were scattered, and the quiet drone of the plane only seemed to amplify the discomfort in his chest. His mind raced as he replayed the earlier moments, wishing he had handled things differently. But the truth was, he had reached his limit. 6. Reconciliation. A moment of understanding. As the plane descended toward Los Angeles, the flight attendant made her way down the aisle one final time. She walked past Barron's seat and, for the first time during the flight, gave him a brief but sincere look of understanding. "I apologize if I overstepped earlier," she said quietly, her voice much softer than before. Barron, still tense, looked up at her. The moment of tension hung in the air, but this time there was no anger in his eyes, just a hint of exhaustion and a desire to move past the incident. "It's all right," Barron replied, his voice calmer now. "I understand your job, but I also have my limits." It wasn't much, but it was a step toward resolution. The attendant nodded, acknowledging Barron's maturity. The brief exchange, though small, was enough to dissolve the tension that had dominated their interaction. 7. A reflection on the encounter. The burden of expectations. As the plane touched down, Barron sat in his seat for a few moments longer, reflecting on what had just happened. Growing up in the spotlight meant that Barron was often expected to behave like an adult far before his time. People treated him as if he had no room to be a typical teenager, no space to express his frustrations or discomforts. While many saw Barron as a privileged figure, his experience on the plane revealed the complexities of living under constant scrutiny. In that moment, he realized how important it was to carve out his own space in the world, even when people around him tried to limit his autonomy. The encounter with the flight attendant, though uncomfortable, had taught Barron an important lesson about boundaries and personal space. As he left the plane, he knew that he would carry that lesson with him, one that would help him navigate the pressures of growing up in the public eye. 8. The role of public perception, Barron Trump's struggle. Barron Trump was no stranger to the challenges of living in a family that was constantly in the public eye. Every move he made was watched, analyzed, and often criticized. While many expected him to behave like his famous father, Barron was his own person. The encounter on the plane was a stark reminder of the burdens he carried. It wasn't just about navigating the challenges of adolescence. It was about doing so under the constant scrutiny of the media, fans, and critics. No matter how much Barron tried to assert his independence, the world's eyes were always on him. Yet in moments like these, Barron found strength in asserting his autonomy. The airplane incident, while uncomfortable, was a reflection of his desire to have his own space and to be treated with the same respect as anyone else. He was not just the son of a former president, he was an individual in his own right, deserving of respect and understanding. 9. The media frenzy, how the incident sparked a storm. As expected, the incident on the plane didn't stay private for long. The next day, headlines surfaced in tabloids and news outlets. Barron Trump snaps at flight attendant, and the tense moment that showed Barron Trump's real side. The media frenzy began, with reporters and paparazzi attempting to spin the story in every direction. Some praised Barron's calmness under pressure, while others criticized him for his outburst. For Barron, the media's portrayal was nothing new. He had spent most of his life dealing with public opinion, but this time he felt a strange sense of empowerment. Instead of letting the incident define him, Barron took control of the narrative in his own way. He stayed silent, allowing the controversy to pass as it always did, and focused on what truly mattered, his future. 10. Moving forward. Barron Trump's path to self-discovery. In the aftermath of the incident, Barron reflected on the journey he had ahead. Growing up in the spotlight was never going to be easy, but he was beginning to understand the importance of asserting his own identity. The airplane encounter, though unsettling, had become a turning point for Barron. It was a reminder that, despite being in the public eye, he was allowed to have his own opinions, boundaries, and frustrations. As he continued to grow, Barron knew that his path would be uniquely his own, one shaped by both his family legacy and his own personal experiences. This encounter with the flight attendant would be just one of many moments in Barron Trump's life that would challenge him, but also define him. And with each challenge, he would become more resilient, ready to carve his own place in the world. 11. The ripple effect, how the incident affected Barron's mood. As Barron sat in his seat after the interaction, his mind was clouded. What started as a small inconvenience had turned into something much larger. He began to replay the events in his mind, wondering if he had overreacted or if the flight attendant had crossed a line. The incident weighed on him, not because of the flight itself, but because of the emotional toll it had taken. Barron had always prided himself on keeping his composure, but this moment had tested his patience in a way he hadn't anticipated. The tension lingered, casting a shadow over the rest of the flight. Barron tried to shake it off, but his mood was far from calm. Every time he looked up, he saw the flight attendants walking by, and his irritation flared again. The emotional ripples from that moment stretched far beyond the confines of the airplane, making Barron realize just how delicate his balance between privacy and public scrutiny truly was. 12th, a public figure's struggle, the burden of constant scrutiny. As a public figure, Barron Trump was used to being under the microscope. His every move was followed by the media, and every personal moment seemed to be up for public discussion. However, what many failed to understand was the immense pressure that came with being scrutinized all the time. Barron wasn't just the son of a former president. He was also a teenager with his own thoughts, struggles, and desires for privacy. The flight incident was a small but telling example of the psychological toll of living under constant observation. His every reaction, every glance, and even every gesture was potentially seen by the world. Barron, like anyone, needed space to be himself, but in the public spotlight, that was often impossible. The struggle between wanting normalcy and being constantly judged was something Barron grappled with daily. 13. A lesson in boundaries. Barron's growing understanding of personal space. Despite the discomfort Barron felt during the incident, there was an underlying lesson that he was beginning to understand: the importance of setting boundaries. In a world where personal space and privacy seemed to be in short supply, Barron had to learn the delicate art of asserting his limits without alienating others. The tension-filled exchange with the flight attendant had been an eye-opening moment for Barron. It wasn't just about the seatbelt or the constant reminders. It was about the need to protect his own space and emotions. He had always lived under the influence of his family and the demands of his public role, but this incident reminded him that he was entitled to his own space, both physically and emotionally. This lesson would serve him well as he navigated life as a public figure. 14. The flight attendant's perspective. Understanding her role and responsibility. While Barron was focused on his own discomfort, the flight attendant had her own perspective. As part of the crew, it was her job to ensure the safety and comfort of all passengers. But like many others, she didn't fully understand the personal pressures that came with being a member of the Trump family. Her repeated checks on Barron were likely intended as part of her duty to maintain safety, but she failed to recognize how her actions affected him. Her insistence, however well-intentioned, clashed with Barron's desire for privacy. The flight attendant, too, had her own responsibilities and pressures, but she had no way of knowing that Barron's patience was worn thin. The tension between the two was a result of miscommunication, a misunderstanding of boundaries, and perhaps a lack of awareness of the unique challenges Barron faced as a member of a high-profile family. 15. The onlookers. How the other passengers reacted to the tension. As Barron's frustration mounted, The passengers around him began to take notice. Some tried to avoid eye contact, not wanting to be drawn into the growing tension, while others subtly whispered among themselves. The atmosphere in the cabin was charged with unease, and it wasn't long before the flight attendants noticed that the situation had become uncomfortable for everyone involved. Some passengers exchanged knowing glances, perhaps understanding the pressures Barron faced, while others seemed more focused on the drama unfolding before them. For Barron, the attention of the surrounding passengers only added to his frustration. The sense of being constantly watched and judged seemed inescapable, even in the confines of the airplane. It was a stark reminder of the difficulties of being a Trump and living under constant public scrutiny. 16. Barron's reflections: the price of privacy and independence. As the flight neared its end, Barron sat back in his seat, reflecting on the ordeal. He had never felt the weight of his family's name more than in that moment. The constant pressure to act a certain way, the eyes of others upon him at all times. It was exhausting. He had always wanted to lead a normal life, but being a Trump made that nearly impossible. The incident on the plane was a stark reminder of the challenges Barron faced in his daily life. It wasn't just about a flight attendant's behavior. It was about the broader expectations placed on him. Barron was trying to navigate life as a teenager, while also fulfilling the role society had assigned him as a public figure. In that moment, he realized just how much he longed for privacy and independence. But it also became clear that finding these things wouldn't be easy. 17. The media fallout. Barron's outburst becomes a tabloid sensation. As soon as Barron disembarked from the plane, the media was already buzzing with speculation. News outlets across the globe picked up on the story with headlines like "Barron Trump's explosive airplane moment" and "The teen who snapped at a flight attendant." The incident quickly became the latest tabloid sensation. Barron, used to the media frenzy, knew this would happen. But this time, it felt different. The media wasn't just reporting the facts. They were dissecting his behavior, painting him as an angry teenager lashing out in public. For Barron, it was a frustrating reminder that his every action, no matter how small, was up for public scrutiny. The media storm that followed the incident only made Barron more aware of the limitations of his privacy. No matter what he did, his life was always under a magnifying glass. He couldn't escape the attention, and it was clear that the consequences of his actions, both big and small, would be amplified by the press. 18. The family's reaction: how Barron's parents handled the situation. When Barron returned home after the flight, his parents, Donald and Melania Trump, were already aware of the incident. They had seen the media coverage and knew the pressure Barron had been under. They were concerned, but also supportive. They had always tried to protect Barron from the harsh realities of public life, but they knew that this was part of his world now. Donald, understanding the pressures his son faced, sat down with Barron to discuss the incident. While Barron's outburst had been understandable, his parents reminded him of the importance of handling such situations with grace. "You need to learn how to deal with these things without letting them get to you," Donald said, offering his own wisdom from years of living in the public eye. Melania, on the other hand, was more empathetic. "It's okay to feel frustrated," she reassured Barron, "but always remember that you can choose how you react. Don't let the world control your emotions." The conversation was a moment of reflection for Barron, and while he understood his parents' advice, he also realized that he needed to learn how to manage his emotions in the face of such pressure. 19. Learning from the experience. Barron's growing sense of self. The flight incident, while uncomfortable, became a defining moment in Barron Trump's life. It was an experience that taught him valuable lessons about personal boundaries, the complexities of public life, and the importance of self-reflection. Barron understood that he had to learn how to handle these situations better in the future, but it was also a wake-up call that his journey would never be easy. As Barron matured, he began to develop a stronger sense of self. He realized that while his last name would always carry weight, it didn't define who he was. The lessons from that day on the plane would stick with him, helping him navigate the complexities of life under the public eye with more resilience. 20. A new outlook. Barron Trump's journey toward independence. As the months passed, Barron's perspective on life began to change. He was growing up and developing his own views on the world, on privacy, and on the expectations placed upon him. The incident on the plane had been an important learning experience, one that helped Barron understand just how important it was to carve out his own identity amidst the chaos. Now, Barron's journey toward independence was far from over, but he was becoming more comfortable with who he was. He knew that his path would always be intertwined with the legacy of his family, but he was determined to forge his own way, learning from every experience and every challenge along the way. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more.